Now, New Zealand and Australia are the latest countries to start talks for a trade deal with the UK, following Japan and the United States earlier this year. And ongoing negotiations continue for us with the EU. But how do we balance those tariff reductions in order to promote an FTA, a free trade agreement with New Zealand, with the potential negative impacts on the UK's meat and dairy sectors at threat? Or so they think. Joining us now to discuss this is former trade negotiator Charles Finney. Charles, good evening.
Good evening, Sarah.
We have you there, broadcasting in from Wellington.
Indeed.
Fantastic. Now, how dicey are these negotiations for New Zealand when there is such a strong buy local in the UK?
I don't think this is dicey at all. Obviously, probably the most sensitive issue that's going to be on the agenda will be some bits of agriculture. But the UK is negotiating with us, and we're one of the first countries to be negotiating with them. So they must want this deal, and they know they have to do a deal with us on agriculture. So I'm reasonably positive about our prospects. Obviously, negotiations haven't started yet, so we don't quite know what they'll be expecting. But we wouldn't be where we are right now if things were as dicey as you are suggesting.
Okay, but what about sliding into that December 31 date that Boris Johnson has put on exiting Brexit, regardless of trade negotiations, trade deals?
Well, that is one of a number of complications. So he's got his Brexit negotiation with the EU. He's negotiating with the US right now. He's negotiating with Australia and also with Japan. So there are lots of negotiations going on. In fact, they started with Turkey a couple of days ago too. So lots of negotiations going on. But they seem to be wanting to do a deal with us in Australia. They know that agriculture is a key interest to us both. And they know that dairy and meat are an absolutely essential for New Zealand if we're going to do the deal. So I'm very hopeful that we'll be in a better position sometime in the next couple of years than we are right now in terms of access to that market.
It's quite a large market too. It's one of the largest importers of dairy products in the world, and the Dairy Companies Association has stated 0.08% we currently import of our dairy products into the UK.
Yeah, well, look, it was our biggest market, wasn't it, for most of our history? It's really only been in the last 50 years or so that it hasn't been. So there's huge potential for growth. The reason it hasn't been enormous for us in recent times has been it's part of the EU, and the EU has got really excessive protections there on those products that we're best at producing. But if the UK is prepared to have a different approach than the EU has had, huge prospects for us. And I hope they do go that way, because I do think the UK has got good opportunities to export its agricultural products to the world. So adopting more of a New Zealand-Australia approach than the EU approach.
Yeah, and those EU negotiations, are they really, has it got to a point of just stalling now?
No, I think both sides are trying their very best. I don't think the Europeans fully appreciate that the UK government could actually go for a hard Brexit. I think they've always assumed that they won't want to go there, and that there will be some form of deal negotiated at last minute. But it looks as though that Downing Street is prepared to play hardball in those negotiations. So I think it's going to be a very, very interesting negotiation to watch over the next 6 months.
Okay, and you're suggesting that the UK's new interest in joining the CPTPP, we shouldn't play hardball with that to get our own way?
Look, I think that the bilateral deal between New Zealand and the UK is going to deliver the best result. The fact that the UK wants to be part of the CPTPP is fantastic news. It's a G7 economy, a G20 economy. Adding another major economy onto the list of participants just adds to the credibility of the CPTPP, and it will be encouraging others to join. But I disagree with those who are suggesting it gives us more leverage. I think it's just fantastic that they want to be part of that agreement, and I look forward to us working with the UK and all the other members to negotiate with the rest of the world and get the rest of the world to buy into the disciplines that we have as part of the agreement.
Charles, I just want to take the opportunity to jump across to China and the rhetoric that we're so reliant on China. Is there any further developments in China's interest with the CPTPP?
Well, I think that we're probably even more reliant on China than last time we spoke. The China market is still humming along nicely, and a number of other markets are slowing. It's interesting that China has started to talk positively about CPTPP. I think it's probably a more complex negotiation than UK during CPTPP. The big problem for China is that Canada and Mexico have agreed a free trade agreement with the United States that has a clause in it which gives the United States essentially a right of veto over any negotiations with other parties. I can't see the US vetoing a UK joining CPTPP, but I can imagine Canada and Mexico are going to have a tough time with the United States on China in the short term. Let's see what happens in November with the US presidential election. But in the short term, I think it would be very difficult for China to join.
And Charles, before we go, we have Minister Shane Jones up on Sarah's Country next. And I'd like to know, National Party has come out saying that they're very strongly blocking their obligations under the WTO when it comes to pushing for local purchasing of our wood as opposed to exporting that surplus. What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, look, Shane's a good mate of mine and we agree on most things, but his Forestry Bill is one of those things that we do not agree on. It's not a particularly good piece of legislation. It's actually fine to register log traders, but and to improve standards within the industry, but to sort of have government departments or ministers deciding what the prices are or what volumes are is bad. They've improved the bill as it stands, and so it's no longer going to affect prices, but there's still too much ministerial discretion there. So I hope it doesn't pass before the election. He'll disagree with me strongly.
Thank you so much for taking the time. It's always a pleasure to have you on Sarah's Country. Former trade negotiator Charles Finney. This is Sarah's Country.